On guys, it's Husker Alerts here with my first video ever on YouTube. Let's see how this goes. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous. I have not prepared much for this. Should not be saying that, but we're just looking here as Nebraska. Ooh, that's a good game. But yeah, just looking to prepare here for seventh game of the season. Nebraska looking to get their sixth win of the season against Minnesota this week to get to bowl eligibility. Friday night game. I will not be able to watch this game, unfortunately. I will be announcing my high school's football game, which, I mean, it is what it is. You got to make sacrifices for what you love. But yeah, and, Nebraska's going to Minneapolis this week. First truly difficult road test, I'd say. Maryland, they're a good team, just not the biggest fan base. Like, you could see, can pull it up. Like, you can just see, like, look at the amount of Nebraska faithful that was at the game. You could see us just celebrating after the win here. Dylan Raiola meeting the fans. And this is at Maryland, by the way, all these fans. And this is how the stadium looked during the game, like Maryland fans did not show up, which I'm not trying to throw shade to Maryland as a team. They fought hard, but the fan base was not there. And Minnesota, I think they will be there. Minnesota, it's got to be a win. I'm just going to keep it short and simple here. My opinion. This has to be a win for Nebraska if they want to be considered a real team. Nebraska is ranked number 25 in the country, which, I did not expect to be ranked this week, coming off a close winning at Maryland. But, hey, I'll take it. I don't know how I feel about Nebraska going into this game ranked. I don't want this team to get too high, if you know what I'm trying to say, like too high on their hopes. I think it's sad I have to say this, but what's important to point out is that Nebraska is wearing their all-white unis this week. Like, as we can see here, let me pull up my Instagram real quick. As we can see here, and I know the graphics shitty, don't worry. Nebraska will be wearing their all-whites this week, which, as everyone knows, they have not done too well in the past with these jerseys on, coming off a huge loss to Indiana last time they wore them, which, it is what it is, but I don't know, my camera shut off there, but yeah, just Nebraska. What I expect to see from this team this week, I expect to see a lot of fight from Emmitt Johnson specifically. Emmitt is, I don't want to throw shade to anyone on this team, and I say this with all the praise. Dylan Raiola gets all the credit for this team, but Emmitt Johnson is a guy who poured his all into every game, has 650 yards on the season already, just 6 weeks into the season, 6 games into the season, I say. 7 touchdowns. He's averaging 6 yards a carry. That is just bountiful in this day and age. Only 105 carries, through his workload has been a lot this season, which I'm a little scared of going into this Minnesota game. But what is important to point out is that Emmitt Johnson is a Minneapolis kid. He wanted to go to Minnesota out of high school, did not get offered. So I think he'll go into this game with huge amounts of confidence. I expect at least 100 on the ground from him, at least one tutty. So I expect a huge game from Emmitt, And yeah, we need a big game from Emmitt this week. And from our quarterback, I'll say Dylan Raiola has proved all the haters wrong this season to this point. Last week had a little problem with the interceptions thrown, tallying his interception total to 5 on the season. But when you look at the other side of it, he has 1,600 passing yards through 6 weeks. I mean, much better compared to what he was playing like last year. 16 touchdowns to the air as well. This is a guy that he has really proved to everyone doubting him, the Mahomes this, Mahomes that. Like, I shouldn't say Dylan Raiola is the quarterback in Nebraska, and he will go to the NFL. And I will say that because I have confidence in this kid to do well And with that said, I think that Dylan Raiola needs to have a good game against Minnesota this week if we want to go into Minneapolis and get a win. You can't throw 3 interceptions against a Minnesota team. This team has had our ass almost just every season up to this point. We cannot seem to get a win against them. 2 years ago, I think is what it was. 2 or 3 seasons ago, we opened the season at Minnesota on a Thursday night, and we go up 10-3. And Minnesota, we allow them to get a touchdown in 4th and 10 to tie the game, and turnovers. We turn the ball over again, and we give it to them and let them kick the game-winning field goal. That is not the same Nebraska team. Let me tell you that. This Nebraska team has more fight, and I believe that they can go into Minnesota this week and get a win. So, looking to the other side of it, our defense has performed excellently compared to Michigan's game, really. Our defense did all right against Cincinnati, limiting definitely their passing offense. And Cincinnati's a ranked team, by the way. I was at that game, and our pass defense played amazingly, allowing only 17 points. And then Akron, Houston Christian, those are gimme games. We all know that. Michigan game is really where our first test was. Defense did not play too well. We only allowed 105 passing yards from Bryce Underwood, but this is where we got killed on the run. Justice Haynes, 150 rushing yards. And this week against Minnesota, we cannot allow that to happen. Minnesota, historically good on the run, always had a decent rushing game, not too great this season, as it seems here. Their leading rusher only has 225 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground, not what you want to see from them, but yeah, I wonder if they have more. I'm assuming that Minnesota has a more diverse run game than that, on the ground, they've really been spreading the ball around. Darius Taylor has 205 rushing yards. Seems Cam Davis might be their goal line back. Yeah, they really have just spread the ball around, So what's important to point out, though, is that they only have 24 more rushing yards than Emmitt Johnson as a team rushing, which that is just embarrassing, to be honest. No shade. Actually, I will throw shade to Minnesota. I can't go there. But, yeah, so I just they haven't had too great of quarterback play either, You got your starting quarterback, Drake Lindsey, only 1,200 through the air, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 8 sacks. Not a bad offensive line through 6 games. But nonetheless, Nebraska needs to come into this game playing great defense. Minnesota is a team that has not the best defense by standards, Let's see if I can. Yeah, their defense, they've allowed 10 points to Buffalo, none to Northwestern State. That's a gimme. Well, they allowed 27 points to a bad Cal this season, but it's ACC, which you cannot take. You got to take that with a grain of salt. 28 points to not a great Rutgers team. They do have a better offense than it may seem. Ohio State, that's just take that with a grain of salt as well. Ohio State's the best team in the nation by far. And 20 teams to a terrible Purdue team. Purdue might be one of the worst teams in the country, and they allowed that many to them. Barely eking out a win, and that was at home, for your information. And this just adds to the narrative that Nebraska needs to win this game. The big game narrative is gone. Nebraska can win big games, and I expect to see that this week against Minnesota. Matt Rule needs to do whatever he has to do to win this game. I don't care if he has to bust out the trick plays, whatever, spin. I don't give a shit, bro. We need to win this game. I'm sorry to my bias is whatever the hell that word is showing, but Nebraska needs to win this game this week. And if they don't, they'll fall to 5-2. Nebraska's going to make a bowl this year. I'm assuming, they should with their schedule, the way it fills out. They don't have the most difficult schedule by any means, but If Nebraska wants to be a real team, they got to win this game, and I'm going to continue to say that throughout this week. But yeah, I expect a tough game nonetheless. When Nebraska's playing, it's going to be a close game. My score prediction is going to be 31-20. Nebraska Cornhuskers take the win. I think it's going to be a closer game than the score may lead to be, but as we saw that Michigan State game, Nebraska went up 17 points. But that was a close game. Yeah, I think Nebraska might run away with this at the end, but I do predict Nebraska to win. I predict that Emmitt Johnson will take over on the run. I just don't think that Minnesota's defense has what it takes to keep up. Yeah, let me take a look at some of their defense. But I guess I should have specified there. Yeah, but they must be far down, but yeah, you can see right here, Nebraska has a 14th ranked defense in all of college football, just behind all these prestigious programs. Toledo, what the fuck? But we've only allowed what? We've only allowed 1,600 yards through the season. Only 13 touchdowns while only allowing 4. Okay, I don't even know what the hell this. Okay. And we've only allowed, what is it? Is this those 270 yards per game? Yeah, just stellar to start the season. So yeah, I predict Nebraska to win 31-20. Signing out from Husker Alerts, this is Will Jenham.